Greetings, everybody. This is Leviathan here, and today we're talking God. That's right, it's the Gears of Dreadlands Demon Hunter. This is the new set that the Demon Hunters got for patch 2.6.9, and we'll be able to take this into Season 21 and blast with it. It'll be by far the best Demon Hunter build for the highest GR clears, and the great news about this is that it's looking like it'll be part of the group meta as well, too, if you're into that. So you'll be able to do some speed GRs with like some double god DHs. There's even going to look like room for support DHs as well, potentially. So there'll be a lot of Demon Hunters running around next season. Impale got a little bit better too, but that's out of the scope of this video. Things to note, the video description will have a lot of resources for you. I'm going to mainly be talking from this D3 planner, which there will be a link to that in the video description. There's also a written guide over on Diablo fans. You can check that out. And any other resources that I find will all be there. Timestamps as well, so you can skip around for certain sections that you find more useful. And then maybe another thing at the top is that because this build and this set and everything is so new, we have some versions that are all performing really well. I'm choosing one that I've seen a lot and I've tried out myself, and it seems to work pretty well. So it's kind of the one I'm going out the gate with, but it could very well come to pass that during the season, someone finds a new way to tinker with this and makes an even better version of the build. We'll probably try to update for that. So make sure you keep tabs on this video, subscribe to the channel, that way you won't miss any updates. But in a pinned tweet, or sorry, a pinned comment, or like a update to the video description, and obviously updates to the D3 planner and the written guide itself. I'll try to keep up to tabs on everything that people are doing, so that if we get something that's even juicier than this, which is crazy if that exists, but it could, then we'll talk about it. So like I said, lots of different versions, but we're going to cover one in particular. I'll tell you about some variations and things along the way too, though. All right, so first things first, let's discuss the actual set itself. This is a new set, so some people may not know all the ins and outs of it yet. Two-piece set bonus is that you gain 4 seconds of momentum when attacking with a primary skill at a max duration of 20 seconds. Your primary skills deal 10% increased damage per second of momentum. So now momentum is a brand new mechanic that this set introduces, and it does what it does. So you get 4 seconds every time that you attack with a primary skill, which is like your Hungering Arrow, grenades, bolas, etc. And there's a max duration of 20 seconds. So basically it takes 5 of those primaries shot out in like back-to-back fashion, and you would get up to the max duration of 20. And then you basically need to shoot another one every 4 seconds or so to keep refreshing it and stay at that like 20 to 19 stack count. The reason you want to do that is because, like it says, it scales up your primary skill's damage per second of momentum. So that's 200% at the max. And then also here in the 4-piece set, there's some interaction with that as well. So strafing against enemies will automatically shoot your last used primary skill, and also give 60% damage reduction while you're strafing and for 5 seconds after you stop strafing. While you're strafing, you gain 8% increased movement speed for each second of momentum. So that is another tie-in to why momentum is amazing, because at max that's 160% movement speed for free. It's absolutely insane. What it will do for you is allow you to scout areas very quickly, skip terrible GR floors. You just always want to be benefiting from that movement speed, so you want your stacks to stay pretty high. You can pull lots of groups of enemies together by just speedily, searching out the entire floor, having all the monsters aggro to you, and then make some gigantic pulls, which are going to be very good for the way that we operate with Hungering Arrow, with the Devouring Arrow rune. And then last but not least, the 6-piece set bonus gives you lots of damage, as per usual. Your primary skills deal 10,000% increase damage. One more thing to mention about the 4-piece set bonus, it's important to note the idea of strafe using your last used primary skill, because in some versions of this build, you can roll with a dual primary skill version. So like if you're going to use the new Odyssey's End or the improved Odyssey's End, then you'd be using Entangling Shot, but Hungering Arrow would be like your main damage dealer, so you'd kind of entangle everything, go into strafe, entangle everything, and hop back out, shoot a Hungering Arrow, and then go back into strafe, and now your strafe is shooting Hungering Arrows. So there's going to be some back and forth with that, and you need to be cognizant of the last primary you've used before you enter strafe so that you can get max DPS done. But we'll get to that. So that's the set explained in a nutshell. I want to take some time now to talk about the skills in this version of the build, and like I said, we'll talk about some variations too. Things that don't vary. Hungering Arrow, Devouring Arrow. This is by far the strongest setup for all these changes that they've made to the primary skills, with like buffing some of the existing powers and making some of the old quivers better and stuff like that. Hungering Arrow, Devouring Arrow, just insane DPS, and the mechanics of it are that here the rune tells you that each consecutive pierce increases the damage of the arrow by 70%. It's a cold skill, so it's a cold build. You want to stack cold affixes on gear. We'll talk about that in a bit. The catch here is that every enemy that it pierces increases that damage amount, and the arrow will stick around as it continues to pierce for a set traveled distance. So that means if you have these really tight pulls, just like 50, 60, 80 monsters in a pull, it's gonna travel through that pack of monsters and just get a bunch of pierces, and that damage is gonna skyrocket very quickly. You'll see in the gameplay video that I have at the end, that particularly shows off itself in a missile dampening, because there's very little travel for the arrow, but there's tons of opportunities to pierce it. You will destroy anything inside of missile dampening in super quick fashion. It's disgusting. So Hungering Arrow just does some nutty things in the right conditions. That's why it's so strong. And we buff it up with a few other powers as well. Next, obviously, you have to have Strafe. There aren't too many choices for the rune. More people, more often than not, are going with Drifting Shadow, because it just allows you to have your max movement speed. When you're strafing, you actually reduce your base movement speed. So this rune just returns that to normal, essentially. So you have no penalty while you're strafing. You don't care about Strafe's damage or anything like that, though. It's just there as a activator for the 4-piece set bonus. You just care about all those Hungering Arrows. Juicy, juicy. All right, so now some of the variation. The skill that people are mainly starting to use right now for defense is Shadow Power with Gloom. Gloom rune gives you a 35% damage reduction when it's active. It only lasts for a few seconds, and it does cost some discipline. So the way I've been trying to ideally use it is whenever things get hot, or I'm about to go into a pull with a decent amount of elites and stuff and affixes flying everywhere, try to make sure it's up just to have that extra defensive bonus. But you will run out of discipline if you're spamming it, so you kind of have to be selective about using it. The other option that people are going for is good old Smokescreen. And there's a couple of runes that you can use there, but I think people mainly like Lingering Fog, and that's one that makes it last a little longer. You can even go with Vanishing Powder, which removes the cost, but it puts a cooldown on it. And the thing is that is okay, because especially if you're going to link it up with an elusive ring, then you basically have 100% uptime on your elusive ring, since that power lasts for 8 seconds, I believe. But if you're not, then this cooldown means you're going to have to very selectively use your smoke screens. So Lingering Fog is good. Displacement's really nice for like speed when you're just trying to get a crap ton more movement speed. But for now, we're going with Shadow Power with Gloom, and I think that is a great option. But feel free to mess around with whichever one feels the most comfortable to you. Next, Companion. So people are either going with Boar Companion, which is obviously the more defensive choice, or Wolf, which is just purely the offensive choice. Wolf is insane because it is a multiplier to your damage. So if you can survive and you don't need Boar, I would definitely say go with Wolf. And you can use that to sort of have a big burst moment, since we are using a COE. And we'll talk about the cube in a moment, but this is the place where you could swap this to an elusive ring if you wanted, for more defense instead of offense. But basically you have that window where the cold rotation will come up for convention. Hopefully you've got an Oculus ring to step into, and you could activate Wolf, and then there's just this huge damage bonus window you can go off and pop off on enemies. But either way, whichever one makes the most sense for you, I would maybe start with the defensive option, and then if you feel like you don't need it, drop it, pick up Wolf, because it's a great offensive boost. Next up, Fan of Knives, Bladed Armor, purely defensive here. This is pretty much in every version of the build. This is going to increase your armor 40% for 6 seconds, and it's a very low cooldown skill, so you basically have 100% uptime on this if you have any decent amount of cooldown, and you should, because in order to get 100% uptime on the next skill we'll talk about, which is Vengeance, you're going to need at least 37% cooldown reduction, assuming that you're holding on to a 65% power on your Dawn. And that's really what you want to aim for, because otherwise the cooldown requirements start to ratchet up quite quickly, even on like a 63 or a 62 or 61%. So ideally aim for 65, but you can always index into more cooldown rolls anyways, because you will have an extra one than the norm, if you will, by having a flavor of time. But if you go with the 65, you can actually free up a potential fix. And then for Vengeance, you're using Dark Heart, which is another defensive option, and you don't need Seethe or anything like that because you should be getting plenty of Hatred back. So those are the skills, the active skills, and then we'll go into the passives. So here, Archery is one that Softcore in particular is taking, and this makes it so that if you have two-handed crossbows, which seems to be the most popular version of the build, is using one-hand crossbow and another one-handed crossbow, then you're going to get both 5% critical hit chance and 1 hatred per second, which kind of offsets some of the hatred that you'll be spending while you're strafing. But again, in big pulls, it shouldn't really be that big of a deal. It's just kind of nice to have. You more want it for the extra critical hit chance, since normally if you have a quiver in your offhand, you get like 10% critical hit chance, so you'll be losing a little bit here. But you can make some of it up in Archery. For Hardcore, highly recommend drop Archery, pick up Awareness, because you can definitely get into some hot situations with this, and suddenly you'll get procced with a lot of elite affixes and big pulls and stuff like that. So I would say to use this to leverage either more offense or cheat death. The other three seem to be staples, and these are some of the strongest passives that the Demon Hunters have for their purposes. So Ambush, 40% additional damage to enemies that are above 75% health. Just a really good kind of nuke to get enemies down when they're fresh on health. Just good offensive. And then the other offensive one, Cull the Weak, increased damage against slowed or chilled enemies by 20%. This is going to be great because it's just a multiplier to your damage. You'll be able to activate it from things like Fan of Knives. If you're using, there's a version of the build that instead of Taeguk uses Bane of the Trap, so all those enemies will be slowed when they're in that melee range, which you should be in. So there's multiple ways to proc that, but either way, you should be benefiting from it pretty much at all times. And that also ties into Numbing Traps as well, which is a defensive option, and it reduces the damage of enemies that have been slowed, chilled, or hit with your Fan of Knives, Spike Trap, Caltrops, Grenades, and Sentry Fire. Reduce their damage by 25% for 5 seconds, and they're going to be under these effects all the time, basically. So will definitely decrease some of the incoming damage, especially in these very, very high GRs that you'll be able to run with this crazy, awesome build. So for the Kanai's Cube, we'll go ahead and do that right now. We have 9th Series Satchel, which is previously a Hungering Arrow item, but they just made it way better. It's now a guaranteed chance to pierce, so your Hungering Arrow is always going to pierce, and it deals 450 to 600% increased damage in the cube. It's going to be maxed out, so 600%. It's just a nice, huge steroid boost to your Hungering Arrow. In the armor slot, Depth Diggers, more increase to your Hungering Arrow primary skills. That Generate Resource will deal 80 to 100% in the cube. Additional damage, so that's just another nice multiplier to your Hungering Arrow. And then, like I was mentioning here, in the jewelry slot, we're taking Convention, which is the best offensive option. But if you want to go defense, you would definitely sacrifice some offense here. But you could pick up Elusive Ring and feel a lot more safer. And you can activate Elusive Ring even with, if you keep Shadow Power, that is obviously one way to do it. And you can also activate it off of Smokescreen as well. So those are the skills. Like I said, there are some other options too. I guess we can kind of start to talk about that and then transition into gear, but also come back to skills a little bit. So basically the thing to note, some stuff is very, very like standard and seen in all versions of the build, but the biggest deviation is this Val's Bequest. And it took a while to figure out why the heck this was being used by players, but there seems to be some very odd interaction with the strafe projectiles getting the ability to pierce from this item, in that when those strafe projectiles pierce, they trigger another chance for the 4-piece of the set to fire off more primary skills. Not sure if it's intended or a bug or whatnot, but basically it means that you can get a lot more DPS out of this option if those projectiles trigger additional primary skills for you. And right now it's seeming to work really well. I guess we'll have to see if the developers decide that it's actually not supposed to work that way or not intended to interact that way. But for right now, this is definitely one of the most popular versions. If it does come to pass that it changes or you look for other options, some of the other ones are that you could switch to a Fortress Ballista, which is a more defensive option because that power gives you a shield, which you'll have up pretty much all the time until damage knocks it away from you. But you keep refreshing it anyways as you attack. That's a really good option. And then, like I was going to mention, the dual generator option would come from if you end up dropping just a second bow altogether and instead now equip your 9th series satchel. So you'd be wearing it with a Dawn. Dawn is always there. Like Dawn just don't change at all. It's always held. And then in the cube, you would cube Odyssey's End for the super increase to the damage that you get when you're entangling shot enemies. And that way you would then have to pick up entangling shot. You'd have to drop something for it, which maybe would be Fan of Knives. It's probably the most expendable, or maybe even a companion, especially if, well, I don't know. Yeah, you would have to kind of decide what matters the least to you, what changes your build the least. But the dual gen can be very kind of difficult to play and also a little clunky in my opinion. So I kind of like just having the single gen, and this version is very strong, just with straight up Hungering Arrow all the time. So those are options that will change up your cube and your skills and some of your equips. But like I mentioned, getting back to the gear, the whole 6-piece set, I'll hover over some of the items so you can see some of the choices that I've made for the affixes. It's pretty standard stuff. This is a build that benefits from area damage, so we're stacking some area damage. We do have Hungering Arrow damage that we can get on gear, so that's on the pants and the belt. This belt is absolutely necessary. It was upgraded for this patch so that it gives you even more increased damage for your primary skills. So you really want to include this. I'm building it this way so you can get the all res instead of the life percent. You just sub that out for Hungering Arrow on the pants, sub out vitality, keep the all res and get Hungering Arrow, because you can always make up vitality and life in your Paragon. So whenever you can get rid of vitality, make it up in Paragon to get to whatever health amount that you want, but go for the stuff that you can't make up in Paragon, such as skill damage and things like that. And the boots, standard again, Dex of it, all res armor, etc. The shoulders is one place where you do want to get a roll of cooldown, like I was talking about before. You want at least 37% cooldown on your sheet, so you're going to get that from Paragon, from a diamond in your helm. We have diamonds everywhere else as well for defense. And then 3 rolls on gear of at near maximum or at least maximum. So 8% definitely is going to come from your shoulders. You get 1 from your Flavor of Time. Hopefully you can find a nice juicy Flavor of Time. Good luck. But that does give you a cooldown roll. It always comes with that. And you need 1 more. And you can get that on the gloves. So you could do something like a CDR, critical hit damage, area damage glove. It's going to be very hard to find, but that would be super juicy. That would free you up, because otherwise you need to get it on one of your weapons. So here you can see I put it on the Valos Bequest, and you can get up to 10% CDR on your one-handed crossbows. So you're either going to get it on one of these, or you could get it on gloves, and then you would have it shoulders, gloves, amulet, or one of your lovely weapons. And then basically touched every item at this point. The Flavor of Time, again, super nice because you get the double pylon, so that means you can fish quite heavily with this build, because if you can get a crazy Conduit with like 8 elites or something, it basically takes care of the rift itself. And this build kills the boss super quickly. Plus we have a Stricken. We'll talk about the legendary gems in just a moment. The Raps of Clarity is in here. It's a super just defensive item. It's always up because you're always shooting primaries, whether you're in strafe or not. So this is great just for the damage reduction. You're going to need it. Very standard gearing, or affixes on it as well. And then Focus Restraint, because it just naturally plays into the build. You shoot off a primary whenever you're refreshing your momentum stacks, and then you'll be in strafe. And so strafe is a spender, Hungering Arrow is a generator, boom, Focus Restraint right there. And again, we want area damage, we want nice tight packs, so those devouring arrows can travel through and just gain crazy damage, and area damage will help kill stuff down. Really nice. So that's how we're kind of itemizing here with crit and area damage. I don't know if I hovered over the weapons yet, but here I'm going with just damage and area damage, CDR. One thing to note, I've noticed a lot of people on their Valos Bequests are leaving the strafe damage And again, strafe doesn't do like any of our damage at all, so having like a nice fat chunk of strafe damage just isn't useful. You can roll it away. So I'm not sure if some people just don't know that, or maybe they had other things they would rather roll away, but it's literally completely useless. So you can roll that away and pick up another one of these stats like area damage or cooldown or whatever have you. So definitely keep that in mind for your Vault's Bequest. And last but not least, the legendary gems. Simplicity Strength figures in super nicely here because it's a gem that's made for when you're a generator build or using a primary skill. It's going to increase that damage for you and keep scaling up. So multiplier, so that's great. And the secondary is super good because it heals you 4% of your max health. So it actually motivates you to to get some vitality from Paragon and such, to have a nice healthy health pool, and it makes this heal even better because it's going to scale off of your health. But it will really sustain you, and so you'll kind of see like your life do a little yo-yo sometimes if you're taking some damage, but you'll heal it right back up. So that's amazing. Bane of the Stricken to help us kill the boss. I realized I didn't even put any levels on this, but obviously you'll want it at least rank 25, but you should be able to level it way higher than that. Usually I just make these all like generic rank 100 or whatever. But yeah, Bane of the Stricken helps you kill the boss faster, and you will kill the boss relatively quickly with this build. And then like I had mentioned before, Teguk, it's like the defensive offensive option because you get armor from it, which is really nice. Just to give you that extra defense, and then you also get the damage from it as well. The other option is to take a Bane of the Trapped, which is going to be purely offensive, no defensive component to it. But you may need the defense if you're kind of still gearing up and not a high Paragon level and stuff like that as you go into those higher GRs. But if you can afford to just go pure offense, then yeah, definitely swap to a Bane of the Trapped. It's a better damage option. And that is basically going to do it for this build. If there's anything else I missed, if you have any questions or concerns, definitely hop into the comments, let me know. Coming up next is the gameplay. I'm doing things a little differently for this video. It'll just be kind of a portion of what I was testing out as I was playing around with the new set and getting some of the gear together. So hopefully you like that. Yeah, again, any comments or suggestions or things that you're figuring out or changed or craziness, let's talk about it. Let's hear about it. Hop into the comments, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Enjoy the gameplay. Adios for now.